Now, the moment that I've waited for now is what I was created for now. I'm gonna let you know what I'm feeling now. I must be quite emphatical. I'm feeling plain ecstatical. Wow. I might just float right up to the ceiling. The joy inside me, the smile you see, it's for one reason alone. The time and place where I want to be is holy hot damn, right where I am now. The past is too historical now. The future needs an oracle now. Is when you feel euphorical. Trust me, your crowning achievement, your greatest prize will come on the day that you realize the moment you're living for. Wow, is now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Britt Elders. I'm sitting in for Shirley, who's traveling today. She's as busy as ever and will be back at the helm of IE Radio as soon as her schedule permits. Tonight, our friend Dr. Larry Malerba is back with us. Larry is a homeopathic doctor, an author, and an educator who for more than 25 years has been a trailblazer of a new paradigm of medical thinking. Along the way, he's sought to build bridges between holistic healing, conventional medicine, science, and spirituality. He is the leading proponent of a green revolution in the study of health and the practice of healing. His full bio and a link to his website and to his books is right there on your radio page. Be sure you check it out because it's very important. It's packed with information. Okay, Larry, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Hi, Britt. It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
It's been a long time, and we have a lot of important things to talk about, but I'd like to start with the basics of homeopathy because many people don't know how it functions, and they feel it's sort of cloaked in mystery, and they may have heard some MD that hasn't looked at it call it voodoo medicine, and it's not. So could you explain how it works?
Sure. We can give the kind of the short, straightforward answer, which is that homeopathy is a system of medicine that was formulated about 200 years ago based upon the principle of similars, which is to say that any substance can cause a variety of symptoms characteristic of that substance. So homeopaths study these substances and their profiles, and they match the symptom profiles up with patients who have similar symptom profiles. So, for example, if someone had shingles, herpes zoster shingles, and their particular case of shingles was on the left side of the body, and it was very itchy, and it broke out in blisters, and it oozed a lot. The symptoms that exhibit that particular case of shingles matches up with the substance poison ivy. So a homeopath might use a homeopathically diluted dose of poison ivy to treat that case of shingles because poison ivy is capable of causing symptoms very similar to that person's case of shingles. And if the match is correct, it will accelerate healing and help the person get over the shingles. Now you can apply the same principle to just about anything, whether it's a physical problem or a mental emotional problem, because substances also can induce uh, mental emotional symptoms, right? So someone who brings their child into me who um, is having nightmares and is afraid of the dark and won't be alone and is having temper tantrums, that is a very common profile of a lot of kids who have nightmares. And there's a very common remedy called stramonium made from a particular plant that, if ingested in its normal form, could induce a kind of paranoid state of fear and fear of the dark and bursts of irritability and aggression. So in its highly diluted homeopathic form, it could actually help resolve that child's fear and nightmares and fear of the dark. So that's kind of the overarching principle of homeopathy.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me that it's been used for over 200 years. I mean, when you go to a pharmacy in Germany, they'll ask you several different questions to find the remedy for you rather than give you a prescription 90% of the time. So that's where they are in Europe with it, and in other places of the world too. South America uses it quite a bit. We seem to be behind the curve. Why is that?
Yes, we are behind the curve currently. The irony there is that the great renaissance of homeopathy occurred in the United States starting in the mid 1800s, and homeopathy exploded in the U.S. to the point where there were 22 homeopathic medical schools. There were over 100 homeopathic hospitals. There were 700 homeopathic physicians in New York State alone, here where I live. And so homeopathy was a big deal. But then it started to lose momentum and fade, largely due to the efforts of the American Medical Association, which came into existence as a direct reaction to the growth of homeopathy and the growth of midwifery at the time, because they felt the competition, they were going to be left behind. So they organized, and they created trouble for the homeopaths, and regulatory bodies started to crack down on homeopathic educational institutions because they claimed they didn't meet up to the standards of conventional medical institutions, which was kind of ridiculous and silly because they're two completely different types of systems of medicine, and so they shouldn't have similar standards. And so it became very difficult in the United States to practice homeopathy, and it almost faded away into oblivion, and then made another surge recurrence in the early 1970s here in the United States, and since then it's been booming again. But in other countries, all across Europe, it's always been very popular. In India,
it's a given over there,
exploded. In India, there are over 200,000 homeopathic doctors, and there are many institutions. And in India and in Switzerland, homeopathy is an official part of the government agencies that oversee the medical systems, and they've incorporated homeopathy into national health care.
Yeah, we're going to really get into this a little deeper, but I want to talk to you because you've used it for so long in your practice, and you've treated everything from allergies to mumps with success. Do patients ever have severe side effects from homeopathic remedies?
Patients can have a reaction to a homeopathic remedy, but it's not what I would call a side effect. I'd call it a healing crisis, right? The classic concept of the healing crisis, in the vast majority of cases, amounts to, I give somebody a remedy, I get a phone call 2 days later, the person says, I had a headache after I took that remedy, then I came down with a cold, and I've got a cough now. And so that's the typical sort of version of a healing crisis. Very rarely is it more dramatic than that. But every once in a blue moon, someone can have a strong reaction to a remedy. But the good thing is usually on the other side of that so-called homeopathic aggravation or healing crisis is improvement. That's the whole idea, right? If you're taking a tiny little dose of something that can mimic your symptoms, sometimes at first those symptoms become aggravated before they resolve and start to get better, right? So sometimes there's that initial aggravation followed by improvement. And that's, nothing even close to what we would call a conventional side effect from a crude pharmaceutical drug.
Yeah, all you got to do is watch the commercials on television, and that should be enough to scare you out of taking any of those. So if you have the flu, can you go get something like a silicosmin, something over the counter, or do you need to see a homeopathic doctor?
It all depends upon your knowledge of homeopathy. The cool thing about homeopathy is that it grew and expanded in the United States mainly through mothers who used their remedies out on the frontier, so to speak, to treat their families, and they sold and still do sell homeopathic remedy kits, which have an array of medicines in them. And so, if you had a few books, reference books, and a kit, you could treat a lot of things right there in your own home with some knowledge of homeopathy. Now, if you don't understand homeopathy, you can take more of a shotgun approach, so to speak, and try some remedy or some over-the-counter remedy like something that they sell, which is called the silicosmin.
Thank you for the correction.
and that may or may not help your flu. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And that's kind of the one of the guiding principles of homeopathy is individualized treatment. So when you come to understand homeopathy, you realize that one flu is not like another flu, or 5 people can have the same flu that came through town, but they all have different symptoms. So you have to tailor the treatment to the particular symptom pattern of the person. So there are many different remedies that could potentially help someone with the flu. You have to choose the one that most closely matches your symptom profile, your version of the flu, and when you do so, you'll get much better results that way.
It's fascinating. It's like cures like, but in such minuscule doses. And is this why so many medical doctors don't think it could work?
Sure. That's the long history of homeopathy and its and antagonism from the allopathic medical world is that conventional medicine and conventional science has always argued that the homeopathic doses are too small to have any appreciable effect. They can't possibly work. They must be placebos, they claim, which is an interesting contrast to the current FDA's attitude towards homeopathy. But that's always been the knock against homeopathy, that the doses are too small to work. The homeopaths, on the other hand, they respond by saying, well, homeopathic remedies are nothing whatsoever like conventional pharmaceutical grade drugs, and they're not like them. They don't work like them. There's nothing similar at all. So you don't understand homeopathy, right? And what most homeopaths will tell you is that homeopathy is an energy medicine. It's a form of energy medicine. So you're not treating people with drugs that have physiological effects. You're treating people with energy doses. You're matching the energy of the medicine, of the original substance, with the energy pattern of the sick person. And that's why you can have such profound effects when you see it work, because it works far deeper and more broadly than any conventional pharmaceutical chemical-based drug can work. Chemicals act in a sort of very localized, crude way, whereas if you match the energy of the person and their illness, you can have a much broader impact.
Well, I love your book, Dynamic Medicine, because of that. I mean, you really explain and get into detail all of that. In green medicine, which was the first time I talked to you years ago, you really challenged the thought process of conventional healthcare and took it into an arena that looks at everything. How, like with homeopathy, it doesn't separate the mind and the body. You can work with both there. You should work with both. And how the spirit is part of it. Is this finally being received on more fundamental levels of natural health now?
It is, with certain segments of society. It's also the same thing that makes the other half of society say that's craziness, right? So
right.
I think of it as this very long, deep lineage that goes all the way back to the beginning of time, so to speak, where in the beginning, the Egyptian god Thoth, the god of medicine, the Egyptian god of medicine, in theory, supposedly, handed down the Emerald Tablet, which gave the key philosophical basis of existence to humanity. And in the Emerald Tablet, it says that all is one, and as above, so below. And if you think about that, those are the guiding principles of any true holistic therapy, and certainly of homeopathy. All is one. Mind and body are one. They are not two separate things. They are not two interconnected things. They are one, right?
Right.
So that's why it's so interesting to practice homeopathy and see the results. That when I'm treating, for example, some little girl's ear infection, and I observe that she is very weepy and wants to sit on mom's lap and be hugged and cuddled, and she can't put her down no matter what. And as long as she hugs and cuddles her, she feels better and is soothed. And the minute you put her down, she's crying and screaming again. And that's the profile of a remedy called pulsatilla. You can't miss it. And so in that case, the mental emotional manifestation of the illness was sufficient evidence to find a remedy to treat the physical dimension of the illness too. So when you administer the remedy, the child starts to feel better, the child stops crying, the child gets off mom's lap, the ear infection starts to clear up, and presto changeo, we're well again, right? And so that's like living proof that mind and body are one. And what I talk about in I think in more than one of my books is that, from the alchemists of ancient times, you also used this guiding Emerald Tablet and the as above, so below principle as their philosophy of life, and they too were seeking this what they called the Philosopher's Stone, or the green elixir, they called it. That mysterious thing that would enable healing for everybody, that could transform people from inside out. And that was sort of symbolically represented by their quest to transmute the crudest of metals, lead, into the finest and most precious of metals, gold. Well, the alchemists never actually found a practical way to do that. But it was a metaphor for the fact that they were working on their own personal, spiritual, psychological self-development. But along comes Samuel Hahnemann, the founder of homeopathy, who is aware of all of this sort of philosophical history, is aware of the fact that Paracelsus also a great physician, said a similar thing. He said that you can use similars to treat similars.
Right.
And so Hahnemann begins to experiment, and he stumbles upon literally a technique that like what the alchemists were seeking can transform any substance that you take into its spiritual essence. And when that spiritual essence or that energy signature of that substance can now be used to treat people and their illness, to transform people in a very safe, effective way with a minimum of side effects and no crude, dangerous drug effects. And so to me, homeopathy is like the final manifestation of what the alchemists were searching for. We have alchemy in our modern day right here, and the homeopaths are doing it day in and day out and working very hard at it and discovering new medicines all the time and using them in ways that most people can't conceive of. It's just not, most people don't understand what it's capable of doing until they see it for themselves, until they see it help their child, or until they see it help themselves. Otherwise, it sounds like hocus pocus to them, and it winds up being criticized by people who claim to be scientific, when in fact they're not being scientific because they're not keeping an open mind to a phenomenon that they don't really understand.
Right. A lot of people seem to think when you say homeopathy, they're talking in general about holistic, but this has nothing to do with herbal medicine or nutritional therapy or any of the other modalities of holistic natural medicine. It's specific and scientific in a completely different degree, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, to me, it is the highest ideal of scientific method, because you're starting with a substance, let's say, the herb St. John's wort, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you turn it into a homeopathic solution by taking St. John's wort, putting it in an alcohol solution, diluting it and shaking it, then repeatedly diluting it again and shaking it, and diluting it again and shaking it. You do this over and over until you arrive at a very, very, very extreme dilution of what was originally crude herbal St. John's wort.
Right.
Then you take that solution and you give doses of it to volunteers who are willing to be part of a study, or what we call a proving. And they take repeated doses of it on a daily basis. And as they begin to experience symptoms, they log the symptoms down in great detail in their diaries. So you do this with a whole bunch of people. Then at the end of the study, you gather all the diaries and you collate all that information. Now, they've not been told what they're getting. They don't know they're getting St. John's wort. They don't know anything about what they're getting. But suddenly you realize that of the 50 people in the study, 25 of them complained of nerve-like pain, right? So that's pretty unusual, right? And so on and so forth. There's this symptom profile starts to be formed around the substance St. John's wort as a homeopathic remedy. So now you learn about the remedy and the symptoms it can cause in these healthy individuals who were in the study. And you take that information and now you apply it to people who come into your office who complain of similar symptoms. So St. John's wort in homeopathic form is called hypericum. It's just the Latin name of the plant, hypericum. And when someone complains of a nerve pain, especially one that resulted from an injury, hypericum is probably the number one most indicated remedy. So when so-and-so says, I went to the dentist and he gave me Novocaine and, I did the procedure, but now it's a month later and I'm still getting this nerve pain emanating from the area where he injected me. you give them a few doses of hypericum and bam, the nerve pain clears up and goes away. Someone else says, I stepped on a nail and, I had it treated. I took antibiotics. I cleaned the wound. But now here I am 3 months later, and I get these horrible nerve pains that shoot up my leg, right? So let's try some hypericum. Bam. The nerve pains clear up. So you're using this knowledge that you've gained from studying the remedies for provings and applying them to people and seeing how they work. And to me, that is the most direct, foolproof scientific method that I can imagine. It's an empirical scientific method, which is very different from what modern medicine has become, which is very abstract and statistically based, so that you could almost argue anything as long as you slant your statistics in the way that you want. So
Great.
To me, it's not very scientific. It's kind of deceptive, and it's lost its way. It's lost its way because it's lost sight of individual patients and the many potential ways to heal them, and it's become narrowly stuck in this sort of gross, crude pharmaceutical drug method that gets approved by FDA through this very specific, very expensive way of having drugs approved through randomized controlled trials, which really amounts to, can this drug company play with the statistics enough to convince the FDA that this drug can work? And so it's a totally different thing. It's a total different animal.
Well, that goes to two things that I think are extremely important and people definitely need to get involved with. In 1988, the FDA held a public hearing, and they decided not to regulate homeopathic products like standard medical treatments. That is being revisited right now. And the first question is, homeopathy is now a $3 billion industry in the U.S. So is that why the FDA and FTC are looking at homeopathy, or are there underlying reasons there as well?
Yes. First of all, it's debatable whether homeopathy is a $3 billion industry. It's also suspicious that they keep saying that over and over again, so it makes you wonder, is there motivation out of safety, or are they concerned about the competition? And is pharma pulling the strings behind FDA, getting them to crack down on homeopathy, right?
Right.
But if you go back even further, it was a New York State senator and homeopathic physician named Royal Copeland who authored the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938. And that's when it was an act of Congress. It was passed by Congress, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And it recognized homeopathic medicines as a special class of medicines because it knew from the beginning that they were remarkably safe and side effect free. So it knew that it did not have to regulate them in the same manner as conventional drugs. And so in 1988, FDA came out with its statement about homeopathy, and it maintained that posture to some extent, saying that okay, we're gonna keep homeopathic medicines in the same class,
right?
Which was good. But then along recently, in the past couple of years now, FDA has been making noise about changing all of that and second guessing that, as if it is considering regulating homeopathic medicines like their conventional drugs, which is completely ridiculous. There's a long tradition of safety, and anyone who practices homeopathy knows that it can't do you any harm, or at least it can't do harm even close to any level that any conventional drug can do.
Exactly.
And so it is remarkably safe. And so here we have this weird, like in this upside down world that we live in now, all of a sudden, where everything has been turned upside down.
Right.
It went from homeopathics are hocus pocus because they're nothing more than placebos, to we might have to regulate homeopathy because of its potential dangers, which is ridiculous. So that came from a few reported cases of people who reportedly had their children had seizures, and so at the time those children were taking homeopathic teething tablets. Now, the thing of it is that a lot of kids who have teething issues are also simultaneously running fevers, and they're also at the same age as when they're getting a whole ton of vaccinations.
Right.
Now, it is well known and well documented that a fever can cause a seizure. Happens all the time.
Right.
It's also well known and well documented that a vaccination can cause seizures. That is indisputable. And yet somehow, weirdly, FDA thinks that this kid who had a fever and was teething and may have been vaccinated just recently is suddenly getting a seizure because of some homeopathic remedy he's taking. That's just very suspect in my opinion. And so you wonder, are they using this as an opportunity to ratchet up their regulation of homeopathy? Now, I need to say, it's important to say to the world out there that, the homeopathic manufacturers of these medicines don't disagree with FDA. They agree that there should be regulation. They agree that there should be safety standards, and they do their darndest to work with and communicate with FDA. And that was the whole point of the meetings that FDA held a couple years ago, was supposedly to get input from the homeopathic community. And during those hearings, FDA got overwhelming testimony from the homeopathic world about how they thought FDA should behave towards homeopathy. And we had people coming from England, from the homeopathic societies in England, from India, research people representing Indian homeopathy, even someone from Canada who represented the regulatory agencies of Canada, who stood in front of FDA and said, these drugs are safe. We see no reason to regulate them the way you are considering, and this is the way we do it in Canada.
Right.
Nevertheless, in spite of all that, FDA recently came out with a statement saying they're considering changing all of this. And what the homeopathic pharmaceutical associations are saying is that they want to work with FDA, and they think the current guidelines as they exist are sufficient, which they are. It allowed them to come out and say, well, we have these reports of seizures, and we're recommending that people not give their kids teething tablets, right? That was their recommendation. So they have the authority to do that. It's not like they need more authority, but somehow or other, this seems to be the threat that's looming over the homeopathic industry. Now, like I was saying, that the homeopathic pharmacies are trying to work with FDA. They're not nearly as suspicious as am I and some other people about their motives. And so I'm concerned about a bigger agenda that's hidden. Call me paranoid. That's okay. But I just being realistic and keeping my eyes wide open and urging people to, do everything they can to support homeopathy and to make sure that it remains something that we have the freedom of choice to use in American society.
Well, how would the Federal Trade Commission get involved? I can see the FDA. All right. So I've got to say, to me, it sounds like they want to protect us into oblivion. If it doesn't fuel their coffers, then they aren't terribly interested in the health of anyone. And that concerns me greatly. But how does the Federal Trade Commission come into this?
Yes, let me talk about that, but let me go take one step back. Like you said, regulate homeopathy into oblivion. When I did research and I found out that there are 200 drugs, conventional pharmaceutical drugs, known to cause seizures, and they are all on the market, and FDA isn't making noise about, oh, you better not use them, or we're going to step up regulation of the entire pharmaceutical industry, right?
Right.
So there's this distinct double standard. So
Right.
there's this isolated complaint about a seizure, and suddenly they want to regulate the entire homeopathic industry, right? Okay, now, FDA is in charge of safety, right?
Right.
And approving drugs. FTC is in charge of marketing and labeling. So FTC came out and in a similar manner acted overly aggressive about homeopathic medicines, which, in my opinion, is what emboldened FDA to take further steps. So the two of them are feeding off of each other. But FDA came out and said, homeopathics have no scientific evidence to support them, and so we're not sure about these things. And they were complaining about the high visibility of homeopathic products on the shelves in stores next to the allopathic products. So once again, it raises your suspicion that, are they really concerned about labeling here, or are they concerned that homeopathy is becoming popular? We don't like this. So the homeopathic industry had to come to a compromise, and they compromised by saying, okay, we're going to stick on the label something that says, be aware that homeopathic remedies don't work according to scientific principles, and they don't have scientific proof, which, first of all, is completely bogus.
Yeah, well, right.
So, as I just explained to you, this whole process, to me, it is the epitome of empirical science, the homeopathic process. Not only that, but there is a growing mountain of conventional research on homeopathy that is showing that homeopathy works. There are literally thousands of research trials. There's even a study that showed that they took a whole smattering of conventional drug trials, and they took a whole smattering of homeopathic trials, and they compared the two groups. And they said, okay, of these trials, how many of them showed positive evidence? How many of them showed neutral results, and how many of them showed negative evidence, right? And the same exact percentage showed up in both groups. In other words, I forget what the number was, like 40% of regular drug trials show that they may have some benefit. Well, and 40% of homeopathic trials show that they may have some benefit. Now, that doesn't sound very impressive when you're reporting about how great homeopathy is, but when you realize that that's using conventional scientific standards for conventional drugs to study homeopathic medicines, which are nothing like conventional drugs. So even with that giant roadblock in the way, it still compares equally to the pharmaceutical industry. If you actually tailored the scientific research to homeopathy the way it works, you would get far better results. And it would be shocking to see how great the results are. So let me give you an example of that, right? So if someone has bronchitis, and it is known that in homeopathy, a common remedy that might help bronchitis is phosphorus.
Right.
So along comes FDA, and they say, we want proof that homeopathy works. So they demand a study that says, okay, I want you to get 100 people with bronchitis. I want you to take 50 of them, give them placebo. The other 50, I want you to give phosphorus. Well, right off the bat, you know that this study is doomed to fail because you are not individualizing each and every case of bronchitis and giving it the specific homeopathic medicine that it needs. You might need to give 20 or 30 different remedies to all the different people in that study to treat all those different cases of bronchitis. So you can't study homeopathy in that way and get fair results. And yet, this is what the conventional medical world keeps doing to homeopathy. It keeps applying this inappropriate litmus test to homeopathic medicines in order to have the industry prove to them that it works, instead of listening and opening their minds and saying, oh, okay, I see you're saying homeopathy works differently. Okay, let's see your evidence here. But they don't want to hear that. They don't pay any attention to that. And they literally come out and FTC says, there is no evidence to support homeopathy. And most critics say there is no evidence to support homeopathy. And the truth is the dead opposite. There's actually a ton of evidence that supports homeopathy.
So the basis in all of this, I mean, the real gut core of it is that homeopathy treats the individual where AMA medicine treats the symptom, and all people are supposed to react exactly the same. There is no individuality in the medical standard, and that's a huge problem.
Right. As if your bronchitis and my bronchitis are exactly the same thing.
Right.
It's silly. It's not, you know? And so you need to treat everything at face value, the way it is, which is a very laborious process. It doesn't fit, one size fits all medicine. One size fits all medicine says, let's give phosphorus to everybody who has bronchitis. And there are lots of people out there doing that, believe it or not. You have conventionally minded people, doctors and practitioners, who come across homeopathy and say, this is interesting. And they proceed to apply a conventional logic to it and try to use it in that way and, get hit or miss results and say, okay, this is one more tool in my belt next to my herbs and my nutritionals and my drugs, right? But they don't really understand homeopathy. And that creates further confusion so that people don't really understand homeopathy. And that, and if you go back to that study of the bronchitis study where we're using phosphorus versus some antibiotic, the antibiotic study, all they're going to do is say, okay, after so many days, is this person's bronchitis better or not, right? And in a homeopathic evaluation, if you're giving the specific remedy to the specific case of bronchitis, not only are you going to expect that the bronchitis is going to resolve quickly, but that the person in general is going to start to do better, feel better, and not have recurrences of bronchitis. It's a whole different standard of treatment. When I treat someone, as we say, constitutionally, treating the whole person, this person comes in and says, I have had bronchitis for 10 years, and I get it twice a year at the same time every year. And so I proceed to treat them constitutionally, and the objective is to end the vicious cycle. It should stop. Whereas in conventional medicine, the goal is this antibiotic should stop this case of bronchitis, but we're not going to say anything about what that means in the long term. What that actually means in the long term is it usually contributes to the weakening of the immune system and further recurrences of bronchitis. So there's a whole different standard of evaluation that FDA, FTC don't care about, don't even understand. And so it's very hard to explain homeopathy to them, especially when they have such closed minds, and especially when we suspect pharma is behind them, pulling the strings half the time.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned constitutional homeopathy, because I've done that several years ago, and I have never been interviewed, and that's the only way to put it, by a doctor so thoroughly ever for anything.
Right.
I was mesmerized, literally, by the questions being asked and how they tied them together. Can you explain the difference to our listeners between constitutional homeopathy and what you might be doing when you are getting some form of medication over the counter, a homeopathic medication over the counter.
Sure, of course. It's a completely different thing.
Right.
And homeopathic medications over the counter are sometimes combination medicines which have multiple remedies in them. And they are created specifically for specific conditions in the hope that that shotgun approach, maybe one of the medicines in that formula will be the right medicine and it will work for that teething child or that flu or whatever it may be that it's trying to treat, or that case of sinusitis, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of almost a conventional medical approach to using homeopathy, because the pharmaceutical companies market these products in the hope that people will become aware of homeopathy and learn more about it. And when a lot of people do learn more about it, and they start to study homeopathy, and then they may purchase a remedy kit and start to use individual remedies the way they should be for acute care homeopathy. Acute care homeopathy is like treating my cold or my flu or my sprained ankle or the burn I just got from the teapot, with the specific remedy that matches the specific problem.
Right.
Now, that's acute care homeopathy, right? So you kind of have shotgun homeopathy designed for people who don't know anything. You have acute care homeopathy done in a responsible way with over-the-counter remedies at home with a remedy kit and reference books. And then you have constitutional homeopathic care, which is completely different. That is when you, like you said, interview a person from A to Z about every aspect of their life that you can possibly imagine, including all of their symptoms and the details of their symptoms, both present and past, and their emotional issues in life, and their personality traits and characteristics, and their patterns when it comes to sleep and time, and whether the person tends to want to stay up late or get up early in the morning, or sleep on their right side or sleep on their left side, or has a slump at 2:00 in the afternoon and feels tired and grumpy, or has a slump at 4:00 in the afternoon and feels tired and grumpy, or what foods they tend to crave. Do they have a sweet tooth? Do they have a dislike of eggs? Do they crave fatty foods? All of these, and their temperature reactions, their temperature characteristics. So I tend to be a chilly person, and I'm always complaining that my hands are cold, and I can't stand it when the winter comes, and it's hard for me to stay warm, versus the person who says, "Oh, I'm always warm, and I sleep with no covers, and I would never live in Florida because it's way too hot for me." And so you have all these different characteristics that form the profile of this person. And you use all of those clues to search for the one homeopathic medicine that broadly fits the pattern the best. And if you find that medicine, it often has a rather profound effect on the overall health of the person. Sometimes it's one medicine, one constitutional medicine. Sometimes it's a sequence of remedies, it's not always just one. But nevertheless, when you practice homeopathy in that broad way, by aiming the remedy at the whole person, at the big picture, the results are profound. So you may have that guy who's really warm-blooded, who gets up early in the morning at 5 a.m. every day, who has itchy skin complaints, who also complains he has diarrhea in the morning when he gets up, who also tends to be a know-it-all and is always arguing with people about things and always thinks he knows better than everyone else. Well, there's a remedy that fits that profile, and that's called sulfur. And if I give sulfur to that person and it fits, he's going to come back and he's going to say, "Wow, I'm getting up a little later, which is really weird. I'm getting up at like 7 a.m. And I actually put a blanket on when I went to bed the other day. That was kind of weird. And, oh yeah, that diarrhea in the morning has completely stopped. I'm not having that anymore. And that itchy thing that was on the back of my leg, that's gone. And as I sit there and talk to him, it becomes apparent that he's not as argumentative as the first time I met him, and he's kind of softened his tone. And half the time, people are aware of those changes, and the other half they're not. They just,
Right.
they may not have sat down in front of me and said, "I'm a know-it-all and I argue with everybody," but I deduced that from talking to him and getting to know him, and so that thing changes too, right? And he says, "Oh, well, my wife said she's really happy with the way I've been acting lately, and that we haven't been getting into arguments as much." And he may say it in that way, And so this constitutional treatment had a profound transformative effect on this whole person in a way that no pharmaceutical drug can ever do, right?
Right.
And so that's what's so amazing and cool about homeopathy, because that's the expectation I have. That's the goal I aim for all the time. I don't always achieve it, but a lot of times you do, and it's remarkable. It's amazing. It can change the course of somebody's life. There was a case
truly can.
There's a case I had just recently, which was phenomenal. I couldn't believe it myself. That's what I love. It's a case where even I can't believe it, right? Where I was speaking to a friend of the family who was describing her mother's health. And her mother had gone downhill drastically since the death of her husband. And she's now got a diagnosis of dementia, and she's become extremely limited in her thinking and is forgetting everything and is extremely dependent upon everybody around her. And, I talked to the daughter quite extensively about this. And she described, well, my mother was always that way. I said, what do you mean? What way? Well, she was always very dependent on my dad. And there's kind of this, quote, innocence about her. She's very innocent, very sweet, very innocent person. And she was describing a remedy that I know. And there's a homeopathic remedy called Carb. And that's made from barium carbonate. The stuff you swallow for a barium swallow, right? Barium carbonate, right? Well, Carb as a remedy is known to fit people who remain childlike, who don't grow up, right? And so they stay very innocent, very sweet, very dependent, very needy of other people to tell them what to do and what to think and how to be, right? And this person's mom, who was always kind of like that, after the death of her husband, went deeply into that and became very dependent and unable to think for herself at all. So I prescribed some barium carbonate, Carb, for that person. And a month later, I spoke to the daughter, and she said, "It's like I have my mom back. I can't believe it." She started to remember things. She's doing things for herself. And in addition to a bunch of physical symptoms that she complained of, she was having like arthritic pains and I think headaches and whatever. All that stuff cleared up. And she was like her old self, like almost back before her husband had died. And you could not say the same person if you examined her then that she had dementia anymore, right? So it's remarkable what can be accomplished sometimes. That's a pretty powerful example. It doesn't always work that well, but to me, I was surprised at the result there, and I was very happy.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean,
yeah.
It's shocking. I really do think that it's great to go through the constitutional with a homeopathist because it covers everything: your past, your present, what you expect from your future, every single thing. It's so extensive, and most people don't realize how extensive it is or why. And when you finally go through that, you really begin to feel whole. You begin to feel connected between the body, the mind, and the spirit. It's something else.
Yeah, just the interview process alone
Yes.
helps you realize the connections that previously you were programmed to ignore by the conventional medical scientific world, which looks at things as if they're all in separate boxes and unrelated to each other. And a homeopathic interview puts all the pieces of the puzzle together so that you have a eureka. You go, oh my God, I didn't know that my divorce might have been connected to my migraines or whatever. It's amazing.
Right.
You see the connection.
Yeah, it truly is amazing, and I do recommend it for people because in today's world where we want a quick fix for everything, homeopathy is not instantaneous, neither is pharmaceutical medicine. However, homeopathic cures, and I will call them that because I've had great success with them, bring you to a better place as a human being, as an individual. And that's something I'm not sure Big Pharma can attest to.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of issues that are still out there. And this FDA, FTC thing is one. I know on the naturopathic side of things, the FDA is also looking at compounding pharmacies for vitamin C and IVs, and a variety of other things. But homeopathic problems, according to the FDA, are a major issue right now. And we have until like the 20th of March, right, to do something about it. What can we do?
Yes. Let's see. If I wrote an article about FDA just recently on Green Med Info. So if you went to Green Med Info and you Google my name and FDA, at the end of the article, it gives you two steps that you can take. One is to comment directly to FDA, which, the homeopathic industry is wary about that because they don't want people having temper tantrums at FDA. So if you do comment to FDA, they want you to say positive, supportive things about your experience with homeopathy and how it helped you. The other option brings you to a site that allows you to contact your certain legislators who have the ear of FDA and to bring your opinion to those legislators that the current guidelines regulating homeopathy are more than sufficient and they don't need to be changed, and that they should urge FDA to keep the guidelines as they are. And those are two practical steps that can be taken right now.
I will get a direct link to that article up on the website so that people can go to it. And this is, it's too important to just let slide.
Yep, sure is.
What would happen if the FDA actually got involved and tried to use the traditional research to prove or disprove homeopathy?
Well, if you took it to the worst case scenario, which may or may not happen, we assume they would start to restrict certain specific remedies that have things in them that scare FDA, like belladonna, right? So the teething tablets with belladonna. In nature, belladonna is a deadly poison. In as a homeopathic form, it's like completely benign because it's so diluted. But in FDA's mind, that's potentially dangerous.
Right.
And so they'll start restricting products like that and restricting over-the-counter availability. FDA does not have, jurisdiction over physicians and the practice of homeopathy. But if they start saying certain medicines are no longer available, that would make it difficult. And the bigger danger is that if they ever decided that, well, homeopathic remedies have to undergo the same scientific studies that pharmaceuticals do, it would just bankrupt the industry. The homeopathic industry doesn't have that kind of money that costs millions and millions of
To
dollars
fight it, yeah.
just to do a study on one remedy.
Mm-hmm.
So now if you have to do a study on 2,000 remedies with millions and millions of dollars for each remedy, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. So it would bankrupt the industry. The good thing is, you can still get remedies from other countries, and hopefully FDA is not going to do this, but, it's been my role to sound the alarm in the hope that, we will raise our voices so that FDA will pay attention, or someone will pay attention and make sure they behave themselves. And while it's true that safety of homeopathic products is important, it's also true that their current concerns are far overblown, and that if they applied the same level of concern and scrutiny to the pharmaceutical industry, they'd take just about every drug off the market overnight, because
Right.
that's the kind of standard that they're suggesting.
It's so troubling that this. I mean, it's great we can get it from other countries. I'm hearing through sources that there could even be crackdowns there. It's just unfortunate that, like I said, they're trying to protect us into a state of oblivion where we have to either follow the methods that are chosen by them or not, and leaves us no alternatives. And to me, that is just horrendous. That's the worst thing that could possibly happen. I've had too many personal experiences with not just homeopathy, but also all forms of natural medicine, from herbs to, like I said, vitamin C IVs, all of this that need to be taken into account by medical doctors. And I have to say, through some of the things that have happened in my life, I've been able to open the eyes of some medical doctors, which is great. I think we should all sort of gear towards that a little bit. And now they're curious. So if we can do more of that too, I think it's very, very important. But I'm always amazed that things that work are the things that are removed. I'm not against pharmaceuticals and the AMA when they are appropriate.
Right.
But there are other things.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, you need medicine. You need the medical world that does a lot of good things. But you could drastically improve it and reduce the need for medications with all of these other methods that are out there if they would just open their minds. The backlash to these things is coming in the Anglo countries. You got England and Australia and the United States have major movements that are driven by these so-called skeptics who are attacking homeopathy and attacking natural medicine and trying to drive it out of existence. And you go to other more open-minded places like Switzerland and India and South America, and they're embracing these things and embracing homeopathy. It's a very strange situation we're living in, this time where it's very polarized. It's very either or. It's either you're with us or you're against us. It doesn't have to be that way. We should be able to work together. I should be able to tell my patient that I want you to go see Dr. So-and-so and get the workup because I'm concerned you might have a ovarian cyst, and then Dr. So-and-so could talk to me and help me figure out what homeopathic treatment might be useful and so on, and we could all work together. But unfortunately, that's a rare case these days, and it doesn't have to be that way.
That's a perfect world. Dr. Larry, thank you so much for being with us. Very fascinating, very informative. Everyone out there, please take a look at the article that I've listed on the website and get actively involved.
Absolutely.
Let everyone know your experiences with homeopathic medicine. your feelings about it so that we can keep this intact.
Thanks, Britt, for having me. It's really been wonderful. I appreciate you helping spread the good news.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for all the work you do in keeping us informed about how we can be better people and stay healthier on all levels.
Take care now.
You too. Good night. Tonight, everyone, please use that link and let the people in power know your opinion of homeopathy. Let them know that it is not harmful. If you've had good experiences, share them. They have to hear from us. Otherwise, we could lose a very powerful tool. Thank you very much. Have a great week. Good night.